The sun was shining brightly on the day of the wedding. The bride stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her veil one last time. She couldn't believe this day had finally arrived. After years of being a single mother, she had found someone who seemed to truly care for her and her son. Her heart was full of hope and excitement as she prepared to start this new chapter of her life. Her son, a bright and cheerful boy, stood beside her, grinning from ear to ear. He was happy to see his mother so happy, even if he wasn't entirely sure about the man she was marrying. The ceremony was beautiful. The bride walked down the aisle, her son by her side, handing her off to her new husband. The guests smiled and clapped, moved by the sight of the small family coming together. Everything seemed perfect. The vows were exchanged, the rings were placed, and the couple was declared husband and wife. The reception was lively, with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. The bride felt like she was living in a dream. But as the evening went on, things began to change. The groom, who had been charming and kind throughout the entire courtship, started to act differently. He had been drinking, and his behavior became more unpredictable. The bride noticed but tried to brush it off, thinking it was just the stress of the day. Her son, however, was more observant. He had always been protective of his mother, and he didn't like the way his new stepfather was acting. At one point, the boy accidentally bumped into the groom while playing with some of the other kids at the reception. It was a small accident, nothing serious, but the groom's reaction was shocking. He turned to the boy, his face red with anger, and without warning, he slapped him across the face. The sound echoed through the room, and everyone froze. The bride's heart sank as she rushed to her son's side, her mind racing with confusion and fear. The groom, instead of apologizing, looked at her with a cold expression and said something that would haunt her forever. "He's not my son," he said, his voice harsh and unfeeling. "And he never will be." The words cut through her like a knife. She had thought this man would be a father to her child, but now she realized how wrong she had been. Her son, tears streaming down his face, clung to her, and she held him tightly, her own tears falling as she tried to make sense of what had just happened. The guests were silent, unsure of what to do or say. The bride felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and regret. She had wanted so badly to give her son a stable family, but now she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The dream she had been living in was shattered, and she was left standing in the ruins of what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. As the night went on, the bride tried to keep things together for the sake of her son and the guests, but inside, she was breaking. She knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger problem, and she wasn't sure how she was going to handle it. All she knew was that she had to protect her son, no matter what. The wedding that was supposed to be the start of a beautiful new life had turned into a nightmare, and she was left wondering how she could have been so blind to the truth about the man she had married. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. The bride forced a smile, trying to keep up appearances for the guests, but her heart wasn't in it. She could feel the tension in the air, thick and uncomfortable, as people whispered among themselves. Her son stayed close to her, his small hand gripping hers tightly. He didn't say much, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes. He was scared, confused, and hurt. She wanted to reassure him, to tell him everything would be okay, but she wasn't sure she believed it herself. When the last of the guests finally left, the bride and her new husband were alone in the quiet of their home. The silence was heavy, broken only by the sound of her son's soft sniffles as he sat on the couch, his face still red from crying. The groom, now sobering up, seemed to realize the gravity of what he had done. He tried to apologize, his tone softer now, but the damage had already been done. The bride listened, her arms crossed, her heart torn between anger and disbelief. "I didn't mean it," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I was stressed, and I had too much to drink. It won't happen again." But his words felt empty. The image of him slapping her son and the coldness in his voice when he said those hurtful words were burned into her mind. She wanted to believe him, to give him the benefit of the doubt, but something inside her told her not to. That night, as she tucked her son into bed, he looked up at her with big, watery eyes. "Is he going to be my dad now?" he asked quietly. The question broke her heart. She knelt beside his bed, brushing his hair back and forcing a smile. "No matter what happens," she said softly, "I'll always be here for you. You're my priority, and I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Her son nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. He was too young to fully understand, but he knew something was wrong. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the bride couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with questions and regrets. Had she rushed into this marriage? Had she ignored the warning signs? She thought about the man sleeping beside her, the man she had vowed to spend her life with, and wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. But more than anything, she thought about her son and how she could protect him from the pain she had unknowingly brought into their lives. The next morning, she woke up determined to face the truth, no matter how hard it was. She knew she couldn't ignore what had happened, and she owed it to her son to make things right. But deep down, she was afraid of what that might mean for her new marriage, and for their future. The morning after the wedding was quiet and tense. The bride woke up early, her mind still heavy with the events of the previous night. She tiptoed out of the bedroom, careful not to wake her husband, and went to check on her son. He was already awake, sitting on the floor in his room, quietly playing with his toys. When he saw her, he gave her a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. She sat down beside him, pulling him into a hug. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. He shrugged, not saying much, but she could tell he was still upset. Downstairs in the kitchen, she made breakfast, trying to keep herself busy. Her husband came down a little later, his expression awkward and apologetic. He tried to make small talk, but the bride wasn't in the mood. She kept her responses short, her focus on her son, who was sitting at the table, picking at his food. The atmosphere was strained, and it was clear that the events of the wedding night had left a deep mark on all of them. After breakfast, the bride decided it was time to have a serious conversation. She asked her son to go play in his room for a bit, and once he was gone, she turned to her husband. "We need to talk about what happened," she said, her voice firm but calm. He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I know," he said. "I messed up. I shouldn't have done that, and I shouldn't have said what I said. I'm sorry." The bride took a deep breath, trying to keep her emotions in check. "It's not just about saying sorry," she said. "You hurt my son. You hurt me. And I need to know if this is going to happen again. I can't let him grow up in a home where he doesn't feel safe or loved." Her husband looked up at her, his expression serious. "I understand," he said. "I know I have a lot to prove, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." The bride wanted to believe him, but she couldn't shake the doubt in her mind. She had trusted him before, and he had let her down in the worst way. Still, she knew that if they were going to make this marriage work, they needed to try. "We'll take it one day at a time," she said finally. "But if anything like this ever happens again, I won't hesitate to walk away. My son comes first." Her husband nodded, and for a moment, there was a glimmer of hope. But as the day went on, the bride couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from resolved. She knew that rebuilding trust would take time, and she wasn't sure if her husband was truly ready to change. For now, all she could do was take things one step at a time and focus on protecting her son. The road ahead was uncertain, but she was determined to do whatever it took to keep her family together, or to walk away if it meant keeping her son safe. The days that followed were a mix of awkward silences and cautious attempts at normalcy. The bride tried her best to keep the peace, but the tension in the house was palpable. Her son, usually so lively and talkative, had become quiet and withdrawn. He spent most of his time in his room, avoiding his stepfather and only opening up to his mother. It broke her heart to see him like this, but she didn't know how to fix it. She hoped that with time, things would get better, but deep down, she wasn't sure. Her husband, on the other hand, seemed to be trying. He helped around the house more, made an effort to be kind to her son, and even suggested they do things together as a family. But the bride could see that her son was still wary. He would flinch slightly whenever his stepfather came too close, and he avoided eye contact with him. It was clear that the incident at the wedding had left a deep scar, and it wasn't going to heal overnight. One evening, after her son had gone to bed, the bride sat down with her husband to talk. "He's still scared of you," she said bluntly. "I don't know how to fix this, but we need to do something. He can't keep living like this." Her husband sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know," he said. "I've been trying to make it up to him, but I don't think he trusts me. I don't blame him, but I don't know what else to do." The bride thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe you need to talk to him. Really talk to him. Apologize and let him know you're serious about making things right. He's just a kid, but he's not stupid. He needs to see that you mean it." Her husband nodded, though he looked unsure. "I'll try," he said. "But what if he doesn't want to listen?" The next day, her husband approached her son while he was playing in the living room. The boy looked up, his expression guarded, as his stepfather sat down beside him. "Hey," her husband began, his voice gentle. "I know I messed up, and I'm really sorry for what I did. I shouldn't have hurt you, and I shouldn't have said those things. I want to be better, and I want us to be a family. Can you give me a chance to make it right?" Her son didn't say anything at first, just stared at his hands. But after a moment, he nodded slightly, though he still looked unsure. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The bride, watching from the doorway, felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to move forward. But she knew it would take more than words to rebuild what had been broken. It would take time, patience, and a lot of effort, and she was prepared to do whatever it took to protect her son and give him the life he deserved. Over the next few weeks, things slowly began to improve, or at least, they seemed to. The bride's husband continued to make an effort, spending more time with her son and trying to bond with him. They played games together, went for walks, and even started a small project building a birdhouse in the backyard. The bride watched carefully, her heart torn between hope and caution. She wanted to believe that her husband was truly changing, but she couldn't shake the memory of what had happened at the wedding. She kept a close eye on her son, looking for any signs that he was still uncomfortable or afraid. Her son, for his part, seemed to be warming up to his stepfather, slowly. He still didn't talk much, but he no longer flinched when his stepfather was near, and he even smiled occasionally during their activities together. The bride took this as a good sign, but she knew better than to let her guard down completely. She made sure to spend extra time with her son, reassuring him that he could always come to her if anything was wrong. One evening, as they were sitting together after dinner, her son looked up at her and asked, "Do you think he really loves us?" The question caught her off guard, and she took a moment to think before answering. "I think he's trying," she said carefully. "But love isn't just about words. It's about actions, and it's about time. We'll see if he keeps trying, okay?" Her son nodded, seeming to accept her answer, but she could tell he was still unsure. Meanwhile, her husband seemed to be making a genuine effort to prove himself. He started attending counseling sessions, both on his own and with the bride, to work on his temper and communication. He even suggested family counseling, which the bride agreed to, hoping it would help them all heal and move forward. She appreciated his efforts, but she couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that something was still off. There were moments when she caught him staring at her son with an unreadable expression, and it made her uneasy. One night, after her son had gone to bed, the bride decided to confront her husband about it. "I've noticed you looking at him sometimes," she said carefully. "Is everything okay?" Her husband hesitated, then sighed. I don't know if he'll ever really accept me, he admitted. I know I messed up, and I'm trying to fix it, but sometimes I feel like he'll always see me as the guy who hurt him. The bride nodded, understanding his concern but also feeling a pang of frustration. It's going to take time, she said. You can't expect him to forget what happened overnight. But if you keep showing him that you care, he'll come around. Just don't give up on him, or on us. Her husband nodded, but the bride couldn't shake the feeling that there was more he wasn't saying. She knew that rebuilding trust would take time, but she also knew that they couldn't afford any more mistakes. For now, all she could do was keep moving forward, one day at a time, and hope that they could find a way to heal as a family. As the weeks turned into months, the family settled into a fragile routine. The bride's husband continued to attend counseling and made consistent efforts to connect with her son. There were small victories, like the time her son laughed at a joke his stepfather made, or when he asked for help with his homework without hesitation. These moments gave the bride hope, but she still couldn't fully let her guard down. She had learned the hard way that trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. One Saturday afternoon, the family decided to go on a picnic at a nearby park. It was a beautiful day, and the bride hoped it would be a chance for them to bond and create happier memories. Her son seemed excited, running ahead to find the perfect spot while she and her husband carried the picnic basket. For a while, everything felt normal, laughing, eating, and enjoying the sunshine. But as the day went on, the bride noticed her husband growing quieter, his smiles becoming forced. She couldn't help but wonder what was on his mind. Later that evening, after her son had gone to bed, the bride sat down with her husband to talk. You seemed quiet today, she said gently. Is everything okay? He hesitated, then sighed deeply. I feel like I'm trying so hard, but it's never enough, he admitted. I want him to trust me, to see me as part of the family, but sometimes I feel like I'm just the guy who ruined everything. The bride reached out and took his hand, her heart aching for him despite her own doubts. It's not going to happen overnight, she said softly. But you're doing the right things. He's starting to open up, and that's a big step. Just keep being patient and consistent. He'll come around. Her husband nodded, but the bride could see the frustration in his eyes. She knew he was trying, but she also knew that healing wasn't linear. There would be good days and bad days, and they had to be prepared for both. She just hoped that they could keep moving forward without any more setbacks. The next morning, her son surprised them both by asking if they could all go to the park again. The bride's heart swelled with hope as she saw the smile on her husband's face. Of course we can, she said, ruffling her son's hair. Maybe we can even bring a kite this time. Her son grinned, and for a moment, everything felt right. But as they prepared for their outing, the bride couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking on thin ice. She knew that one wrong move could shatter the progress they had made, and she was determined to protect her son from any more pain. For now, all she could do was take things one day at a time and hope that their family could find a way to heal, together. The days continued to pass, and the family's fragile peace held, for the most part. The bride's husband kept up his efforts, and her son seemed to be slowly warming up to him. There were moments of genuine connection, like when they worked together to fix a broken toy or when her son proudly showed his stepfather a drawing he had made at school. These small victories gave the bride hope, but she still couldn't shake the feeling that they were one misstep away from disaster. One evening, after her son had gone to bed, the bride and her husband sat down to talk. I think he's starting to trust you, she said, her voice cautious but hopeful. But we need to keep being careful. He's been through a lot, and we can't afford to let him down again. Her husband nodded, his expression serious. I know, he said. I'm trying my best, but sometimes I feel like I'm walking on eggshells. I don't want to mess up, but I'm scared I will. The bride reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "We're all scared," she admitted. "But we're in this together. As long as we keep trying, we'll get through it." Her husband smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. She could tell he was still struggling, but she didn't know how to help him. All she could do was be there for him and hope that he would continue to put in the effort. The next day, her son surprised them both by asking if they could all go to the zoo. The bride's heart swelled with hope as she saw the excitement in his eyes. "Of course we can," she said, smiling. "That sounds like a great idea." Her husband agreed, and they spent the day together, laughing and enjoying the animals. For a few hours, everything felt normal, and the bride allowed herself to believe that they might actually be able to move past the pain of the past. But as the day went on, she noticed her husband growing quieter again. She tried to brush it off, telling herself that he was just tired, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That night, after her son had gone to bed, she sat down with her husband to talk. "You seemed quiet today," she said gently. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated, then sighed deeply. I feel like I'm trying so hard, but it's never enough," he admitted. "I want him to trust me, to see me as part of the family, but sometimes I feel like I'm just the guy who ruined everything." The bride reached out and took his hand, her heart aching for him despite her own doubts. "It's not going to happen overnight," she said softly. "But you're doing the right things. He's starting to open up, and that's a big step. Just keep being patient and consistent. He'll come around." Her husband nodded, but the bride could see the frustration in his eyes. She knew he was trying, but she also knew that healing wasn't linear. There would be good days and bad days, and they had to be prepared for both. She just hoped that they could keep moving forward without any more setbacks. For now, all she could do was take things one day at a time and hope that their family could find a way to heal, together. Months had passed since the wedding, and the family had settled into a delicate rhythm. The bride's husband continued to work on himself, attending counseling and making consistent efforts to connect with her son. There were moments of progress, like when her son started calling him Dad for the first time, or when they spent an entire afternoon building a model airplane together without a single argument. These moments gave the bride hope, but she still carried a quiet fear in her heart, a fear that one wrong move could undo everything they had worked so hard to build. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, her son turned to her and said, "I think he's trying really hard, Mom." The words caught her off guard, and she felt a lump form in her throat. "Do you think so?" she asked, her voice soft. Her son nodded. "Yeah. He's not perfect, but he's trying. And that's what matters, right?" The bride smiled, pulling him into a hug. "You're right," she said. "Trying is what matters." But even as she held her son, she couldn't shake the lingering doubt. She had seen the cracks in her husband's efforts, the moments of frustration, the times he seemed to pull away. She knew that healing wasn't a straight path, and she worried about what might happen if he ever gave up. Still, she held on to the hope that they could continue to move forward, one step at a time. One night, after her son had gone to bed, the bride sat down with her husband to talk. "I've noticed you've been quieter lately," she said gently. "Is everything okay?" He hesitated, then sighed. I feel like I'm never going to be enough," he admitted. "I want to be a good husband and a good father, but sometimes I feel like I'm failing at both." The bride reached out and took his hand, her heart aching for him. "You're not failing," she said firmly. "You're trying, and that's what matters. Healing takes time, and we're all doing the best we can. Just don't give up on us, okay?" Her husband nodded, but she could see the doubt in his eyes. She knew that he was still struggling, but she also knew that they were in this together. As the days turned into weeks, the family continued to navigate their new normal. There were good days and bad days, moments of joy and moments of tension. But through it all, the bride held on to the hope that they could find a way to heal, together. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to keep moving forward, for her son and for the family they were trying to build. In the end, she realized that love wasn't about perfection, it was about effort, patience, and the willingness to keep trying, even when things were hard. And as long as they kept trying, she believed they could find their way to a brighter future.